Well, we've looked at some of the ideas of the religious type of ideas, and let's look at some of the more mundane things, but that's still relative culture. And we're going to first off, we're going to look at some legal ideas, or excuse me, some economic ideas, some legal ideas, some agricultural ideas, some clothing ideas even, and some domestic ideas. These are all different areas where the culture is going to inform us of different things. The first one we're going to look at is economic. And in Ruth chapter 4, verse 7, remember we were just in Ruth 4:1, we saw that the land was going to be redeemed. But look at what it says here in verse 7. It says, "Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the redemption and exchange of land to confirm any matter. A man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. So the closest relative said to Boaz, 'Buy it for yourself,' and he removed his sandal." Interesting. We actually already see, as the scribe writes down the narrative of Ruth and Boaz in the book of Ruth, he actually has to bridge a cultural gap in the understanding of the Israelites of the day. As a matter of fact, he says, in former times in Israel concerning the redemption of land. He had to explain a custom which is no longer in practice so that they got the message of what was really going on. I mean, if I walked up to you and took off my shoe and said, "Here," you'd go, "Okay, that's a stinky shoe. I don't want that shoe." But here, they basically were attesting this as, I am giving up the right to the land I walk on. And we actually have from the Nunzi tablets found in present-day Iraq that this practice symbolized the releasing of one's right to walk the land. So it's interesting, a culture that looks like it was dominant across this region. The writer downer of the book of Ruth actually had to explain bridging a cultural gap in custom, or in an economic one in particular. Okay, legal. We see in 2 Kings 2:9, "When they had crossed over, Elijah said to Elisha, 'Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you.' And Elisha said, 'Please let a double portion of your spirit be upon me.'" Now, if we just read that flatly, we would say, gosh, Elisha's asking for twice the power of Elijah, because that's how we would read it. Double portion, give me twice what you have. So I want to be even more powerful than you do. And you could say that. But if we go back to the idea of passing on, because this is what he's talking about, let me have this double portion. In other words, I'm going to pass on something, which is exactly what he says. If you see this, then you will receive. You are going to get this. Back in Deuteronomy 21:17, the firstborn of the family was to receive a double share in the father's estate. So in other words, they were the inheritor of the estate. They got the double portion, and therefore they were also supposed to care for the others in it. And so the reality is, Elisha is asking Elijah, I want to be your spiritual successor. I want to be your heir, if you will. I want that double portion. I want to be your family representative because I want to represent God. And that's why Elijah says, okay, if you see when I'm gone, you will receive that. And again, what happens? The mantle comes to him and he receives it. And Elisha is the spiritual heir of Elijah. It's kind of interesting. So even in the language that's chosen there, we might think he wants more power, and what he really wants is the spiritual heritage. That's what he's asking for. So again, simple little things. Agriculture. Agriculture comes into play. There's lots of stuff in agriculture in the Bible. Here's one in Amos 4:1. "Hear this, you cows of Bashan, who are on the mountains of Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who say to your husbands, 'Bring now that we may drink.'" Okay. You cows of Bashan. Not one of those compliments, or it could be a compliment, but in this case it's not. And you might think you say, why in the world are these ladies, because these are women here, being referred to as cows of Bashan? It's not because they're ugly or they're moonful or anything like that. What's interesting is Bashan was a region noted for its great fertility and bounty. And so what they're basically saying is the cattle in this area are well fed. Matter of fact, they're the fat calves. So in other words, we might call them, you fat cats. Of course, that's dating myself again, because that's an expression I'm sure nobody uses today. But it was the fertility. And he's basically saying, hear this, you overfed, overpampered, overgiven. You know, you're like the big fat lazy cows of Bashan, who are on the mountain of Samaria. Now, this is where you are, in Mount on Samaria, where the city was. Who oppress the poor. You're fat. You have everything, and what do? You don't just have what you have and you don't give it away. You don't help. You oppress those who don't even have. And you crush the needy. And then your husbands, you say, give me more, give me more, give me more. But if you didn't know what the expression cows of Bashan look like, that you might misunderstand that this was just an insult. They're being called cows. They are fatted cows oppressing the poor and stomping on people. It makes it even more dramatic. Mark chapter 11, verse 12. It says, on the next day when they had left Bethany, he became hungry. Seeing at a distance a fig tree, he went to see if perhaps he would find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples were listening. Okay, this is Jesus. You go, why in the world would Jesus curse an innocent fig tree? You know, it clearly was not time for figs to be there. There's not supposed to be any figs there. So why would he go looking for figs? Well, in this case, the fig tree had started to bud out, which would be typically in March, with small buds that were considered edible fruit. We wouldn't consider that, but they did. And then the leaves came out. So Jesus was actually looking for fruit that should be present at this time of year. But when he doesn't find it, he curses it, that no one should find fruit on it when it should have had fruit. And naturally, this is more than just an account of the fig tree not having fruit. In other words, this is a picture that, yes, you're not seeing the full fruit, but at this time it was considered fruit. So it didn't have fruit when it should have had fruit. And this is kind of more of an indictment. I should be seeing fruit from you, Israel, and I'm not really seeing fruit from you. Again, it's a narrative. But if you don't know agriculturally that was considered a fruit, you wouldn't be able to have that kind of a fruit, and why he would curse it. What about clothing? Job says in Job 38:3, says, now gird up, this guy's talking to Job, now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. Well, we talk about girding up your loins. Well, in that time, they had robes with typically belts, and to gird up your loins was to pull up that long garment so that you could run, so you were prepared to act, if you will. And so basically God is saying, look, if you're going to do something, I want you to gird yourself up. I want you to get ready. I want you to be able to act. Now you answer me. Get ready. You tell me. So when he says gird up your loins like a man, he's saying, be ready. I'm coming. You better answer. You instruct me. It's not just a, hey, pull up your dress so you can sit down on the comfy thing and we're going to hang out. It's a very powerful statement. Be ready for action, because I'm coming. Domestic. Hosea 7:8. Ephraim mixes himself with the nations. Ephraim takes a cake not turned. And so why does he mean that he takes a cake not turned? What in the world does that mean? Well, if we understand cooking, some flat cakes or breads require them to be turned to the other side so they're properly cooked, like, a pancake today. If you just take a pancake and you pour the batter out there and you let it set, it's just going to burn on the bottom unless you flip it. It's not going to do that. So they paid too much attention to one thing and not the other thing. So they let it stay on one side, but they didn't do it the other. So he says he mixes himself with the nations and he becomes like a cake not turned. In other words, you're paying attention to much of this and not of that. So you are looking to anything and everything around you, but you're not looking at God. You're paying attention to nations and to power and to other events, as opposed to now, yes, you have to pay attention to life around you, but pay attention to God. So again, a cake not turned. Those kinds of ideas that we see there. And finally, on the domestic front, Matthew 6:30. But if God so clothed the grass of the field, which is alive today, and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So why does Jesus talk about the grass being thrown into the furnace? I mean, we don't think about throwing grass into a furnace. Well, it was the practice of the day that they used earthen ovens to cook that pancake-like bread, that flat bread. And dried grasses in the area were usually what they used as fuel for those ovens. And so again, this is a vivid picture that Jesus is using an everyday, you see it every day. You take the grasses of the field, where are they? There they are. Watch, they're in the fire, boom, you cooked your meal over, they're gone. And so again, it's a domestic image that we would not normally think of. When was the last time you thought, let's throw some grass in a fire? It doesn't mean anything to us, but that was daily life to them. And so that's how ephemeral it was. They watched that grass burn up all the time, every single day. Common object, common teaching gives them the message of that's how short your life is. Very important, and just from a domestic scene. So we'll be looking at some more here in just a moment.